I want to present to you this project. It's an initiative that was taken over by the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. So I'm going to explain a little bit how this came up, the concept of it, and what we aim to achieve with this, which has been long developing and is soon to come into reality. So I must highlight that thanks to Paolo Giomi for a lot of the things that I'm going to say, and also because he, in the Italian Space Agency at the time, was the initiator of this idea. Okay, so in 2015, more or less, the UN launched what we all now know as the Sustainable Development Goals. And one branch of this was how these 17 goals relate to the various fronts of actions of the United Nations, in particular, the question of the space program in the United Nations, which is governed by the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And within this, something called the Space 2030 Agenda, which is basically the space branch of the Sustainable Development Agenda, was created, for which one of the main pillars is space accessibility. So this means not only giving nations that don't have physical access to space to facilitate their access to space, but also to facilitate the use of all kinds of information that come from space. That is Earth observation information, telecommunications, but also scientific information. The other pillars are space economy, space society, and space diplomacy, which you can see that are basic applications of the fact that you have some accessibility to space and information generated by space. In particular, space accessibility is a way of responding to the request that the benefits of space exploration should be shared among all nations equally, or one should strive to. I mean, this is probably one of the areas in which there is most inequality between the various nations, is the benefits that they get from the last 70 years of space exploration. So this started being discussed more intensively in the context of an event that happened in 2018, which was the celebration of the first United Nations Conference on the peaceful uses of outer space, which happened in '68, and was, I mean, right in the middle of the space race and the arrival of man to the moon. So this big conference was being prepared, and the UN made a call for member states and for associated institutions to propose projects to compose this agenda for sustainable development of the space programs. So just before going into the details of the response that was given in this case, I just want to highlight that when you think about space accessibility, as I said, you can think of many ways to access that. You can access the data, you can access the orbit itself, you can access the technologies that allow you to actually go to space or do something with space applications, and there is also education. So when we talk about the Open Universe Initiative, we were mainly looking at the access to data, but data not looking down to Earth, so not monitoring of crops or disaster management. That's a big thing, but it's something that is dealt at another level. But data from the orbit looking outside, which is usually non-sensitive economically, politically, militarily, but it's powerful to form people and to train people in skills that then are useful for application in other sectors of society. So this is basically relating data to education and using that as an entry point to train and create critical mass of people that then can help to achieve these goals in the future for the nations that are lagging behind in this front. So again, when you talk about this, we can understand data as an entry door for various nations and groups to space. And it has some characteristics that we can associate to it that make it interesting from the point of view of member states and country policies. One of them is the cost effectiveness of that. Data is available in a very large number. Most of the scientific data is free. The groups that provide this are happy to cooperate. So this is a way of starting to develop training at a high level, focusing on development. It's an easy way whereby you can bring new players into a very advanced area of technology and technology applications. And it has the power of creating cooperation once you create some level of autonomy in the participants to impact something that is very important but hard to achieve, which is South-South cooperation. So you can nucleate groups that don't depend on more developed nations and more developed institutions to follow their own path. And usually this is very powerful in terms of impact. So the Open Universe Initiative was proposed by the Italian government, actually, as a response to this call of the United Nations back in 2016. So this is the session of the COPUS, which is the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, where this was proposed. And the idea was to expand availability of and accessibility to open source space science data to everyone, with the objective of supporting education and development in less developed nations. And so basically, it was motivated from one side on the evidence of the increased rate of production and of scientific data in all fields, including especially space science, and a kind of governmental responsibility to convert this data into effective knowledge at a similar rate. So we are producing a lot of data that's left unused, and you have to justify why you keep accumulating so much data if you don't increase the production of knowledge out of it. And the other thing that motivated the proposal is that, as we see more and more, the technological barriers that were between the usage of this data and the common people, let's say, are falling by the day and falling drastically. So you do have more and more means not only to share this data with IT, but also to make this data more easily approachable by non-experts. So I don't have to show this to this audience, just to show how the amount of data in astronomy and space science in general is increasing dramatically to the point that we are going very soon to reach the same kind of level of data production of particle physics, for example, which is probably the field that most produces data in science. And when you make this data easily usable, in this case, of course, we are talking about experts, but not people directly related to the mission. For example, using the example of the Hubble Space Telescope archives, you can see that the impact in production of science out of open data is huge. So if you see here, the number of papers that are produced from archival, or that is reused data from HST, amounts to 50% of the papers produced with this mission. So it's hugely successful in its archive. And then when you see the amount of people, unique users that use the data to produce science, because of the easiness and openness and quality of the archive of HST, of course, it's an excellent mission, but the archive is have been of good quality, and the facility to use this data guarantees that you take the most of it, compared, of course, to other missions. And here you can see again, in comparison with other missions, Chandra, Keck, ESO, VLT, again, the number of papers produced with Hubble and the number of papers produced with other instruments. And here, the number of discovery points in the media. And a lot of this is due to these papers that are coming from reused archival data. So to be able to give more access to this data to more people, the impact that you have is that you produce more information. And a measure that is maybe important for governments and politicians and funding agencies, which is the specific cost of knowledge reduces. So one of the goals of the initiative from the point of view of the Italian government at the time was to make the money invested in science and the results that it achieved more cost effective. So this is just to show that usually there is a trade-off here in the amount of computation and effort that you have to put in the data to reach at the level of knowledge. And by making tools that treat and allow people to access the data as close as possible to what we call a science-ready data is what you really need to expand the usability and production of knowledge from this information. When we were deriving this, there was this guy who works in the Italian Space Agency. He's actually an economist who developed an economic model to justify some of the activities that were being done in proposing the open universe. So he developed a concept of transparency of information, which goes along with what people use in the public sector. And the thing is, there is 3 levels that you have to respond to so that you have data transparent in a way that it can be widely used by all the society, by different levels of society. So one parameter is the accessibility. How accessible is your data? The other one is how available is your data, and the other one is how usable is your data. And what you really want to achieve is a point where you have what we called here talking transparency. So talking transparency or communicative transparency in these terms is the open data that have good quality level and accessibility level. At this stage, you really have effective transparency reach. So it's not only about having open data that people have difficulty to understand how to use or don't have the tools. It's not only to have a very small amount of data that is immediate for the consuming of the final user, but it's to have a broad amount of data that can be used by a large number of people without too many technical barriers. So this is the concept of openness and, in fact, transparency that is behind the proposal of the initiative. And in fact, there is already a lot that is there. For example, there is the IVOA, of which we heard a lot these days, that produces the basic resources for it. But there is, of course, a layer of technical expertise that you have to master to be able to access that. Nevertheless, the means to diminish this entry barrier are becoming simpler and simpler so that you can welcome a growing and more diverse number of factors every time. If you can reach this systematically, then it's a good way, for example, to reach something that we were discussing the other day. Usually the large missions or the large data providers, they get the money from the funding agencies to create the data, to make the observations, but not to go the next step. Well, now archives are also funded, but the next step of making these archives available to a large number of people, well, there are efforts, and a lot of what we have been doing here is discussing these efforts, but the sustainable funding for that is very difficult. So again, one of the reasons of proposing this initiative at the governmental level was to call attention to this so that you can try to make some pressure so that the funding model can change and include the funding of this extra step whereby the data can be made available to the society at large at a sustainable way in terms of funding. And of course, this increased cooperation will reduce the costs in the long term. And at the back of all of this is the aim to achieve what we call a knowledge-based society. So we talk about citizen science, and citizen science is reaching a level, and here are some examples from Zooniverse, and we saw others today, whereby the citizen scientists are participating in real discoveries and publication of papers. There is an example that was born from some experiences of that were motivated by Open Universe Initiative, whereby we published, for example, a new catalog of Blazar candidates with high school students in Italy. Again, this was in Italy, a place where there are lots of scientists and lots of people that are interested in citizen science, and you have a good education level. To do this in Africa would be much more challenging, but much more exciting, and with a much bigger transformational power. So, and this is what we actually want to achieve with this. So there are some portals that I'm going to put here of tools that were developed, motivated by the developments behind the Open Universe Initiative. One of them is Firmamento. We had a workshop earlier this year for that, and Fabian was there, promoted by the New York University of Abu Dhabi, which hosts this. It's basically a tool to work with blazars and finding blazars and making catalogs of blazars. I'm not going to enter into detail. This is the original portal of the Open Universe Initiative, which was created at ASI. It is still functional. It's operational. Again, it focuses a lot on extragalactic science, but there are a lot of other aspects in there that you can take a look. The basic common aspect of all these portals is that they try to be as easy to use by the common citizen and have the least level of requirements from the technical aspect. But they use all the tools that are commonly used by all our portals, which are, for example, VO and things like this. So they are interoperable. And there is a new one, which was developed recently by Narek Sahakian in Armenia. Again, it's a multi-wavelength data center for blazar studies, and particularly for creating and modeling SEDs online. So it's a bit high level in terms of the science that you can do with it, but it still follows the same procedure and the same views. So the pillars of the initiative are not very different from, I guess, the pillars of all the initiatives that we saw here this day. To increase the transparency, again, as we talked, and particularly including the FAIR principles. To try to resurface data, so to make data that is buried in catalogs available for use and reuse, and broaden the user base, so include more people in the effort of doing space science, but with the goal of promoting development. So this is a bit of the history of the initiative. So it was proposed in 2016. Then there were a series of meetings in 2017 to develop the concept, where the VO people, the IAU were involved, and lots of initiatives in the discussions to prepare. Then there was the formal proposal to the Unispace plus 50. There was an event at Copos to promote it and to have endorsement of the member states. And then finally, it crossed in 2019 the threshold to become part of the 2030 agenda. So if you click in this document, you have all so if you get the slides, it's a clickable link. You can get all the description of what is contained within the 2030 agenda for space. And one of the items that's listed there is the Open Universe Initiative. Then came the pandemic, and it all became very uncertain how we can make an event, how we can do training, how we can engage people. And now, after the pandemic is over for a year, we could enter again in the discussions to be on the budget of the governments and of the United Nations to make an event to promote this. So in the end, in this meantime, Italy did not sign any formal agreements with the United Nations, but Brazil did. And so formally, it's an initiative that is done bilaterally between Brazil and the UN with the support of various groups and institutions around the world. So what is next? Again, this is a capacity building initiative based on open data within the United Nations. And the main goal is not to redevelop tools that are being developed at a very good level by many of the actors that are in this room, but to use the centrality, the political centrality of the United Nations to put together these actions that you are doing here with the places where with places that would never hear about these actions naturally. Not citizen scientists in Germany, not citizen scientists in the United States, but citizen scientists in Africa, in Latin America, in Southern Asia, places where this information cannot be reached easily and cannot find the support to be continued. So with the United Nations can work as a broker to find the people on the other side that want to push forward these things and that can sustain these things, of course, with the external support of more developed states and of the UN itself. So the idea is to then start a series of events and engagement actions whereby you try to bridge the work that is being done at the scientific level by groups like the ones represented in this room and the member states and institutions that would have a demand for that, but wouldn't know how even to start proposing it in their countries or institutions. So we are discussing now a pilot event to be realized in Brazil next year. And if things go as planned, what we would do is send a call for those of you who are interested in participating. And the idea is to make this an in-person event with a hybrid format, so that groups that cannot attend personally can follow and can start engaging with the various groups remotely. So keep tuned. I will send the information around once things evolve. Again, we are discussing, these things have to enter the budget, then you have to sign an agreement to be able to make the event. There is some bureaucracy around, but we are getting there. And once this starts, we can see how efficiently we can work in putting the two far sides of the world together to reach something new, perhaps, and with some impact. So that's it.